In 2002, ABC ran a segment claiming they had the Zodiac Killer's DNA. They had tested envelopes from his letters, the ones he'd licked and sealed himself, and they had a partial profile, a real partial DNA fingerprint, male, specific enough to potentially identify someone. They compared it to their prime suspect, a man police had been watching for 30 years. A man whose friends had told investigators he'd described the murders before they happened. A man who was wearing a Zodiac watch when detectives came to question him. The result came back. No match. Arthur Leigh Allen was excluded. And that was basically that. The story was over. The suspect was cleared. The case went cold. Except the DNA wasn't from inside the envelope. It was from the outside of the stamp, which means it could have belonged to a postal worker, an evidence handler, anyone who'd ever touched that letter in 30 years. The exclusion everyone cited, it was built on a sample that may have had nothing to do with the Zodiac Killer at all. Today we're going to do something different. We're not going to ask whether Arthur Leigh Allen was the Zodiac. We're going to stress test the case against him, the way a defense attorney would. We're going to look at every alibi, every piece of forensic evidence, and the one physical object that may have started all of this. And at the end, you're going to decide. Act 1. The alibis. 4 murders, 4 problems. Arthur Leigh Allen lived at 32 Fresno Street in Vallejo, California. He was a former Navy man, a school teacher who'd been fired for molesting a student, a man in his mid-30s who lived in his parents' basement and went scuba diving alone on weekends. He was first named as a suspect in 1971, 3 years after the killings began, when his friend Don Chaney walked into a police station and said Allen had described the murders to him before they happened. Described killing couples at lovers' lanes, attaching a flashlight to a gun, sending letters to newspapers, calling himself the Zodiac. Chaney's tip set off a 20-year investigation, and it started with a simple question. Where was Allen when the murders happened? Murder 1, Lake Herman Road, December 20th, 1968. Betty Lou Jensen, 16, David Faraday, 17. The first murder happened 6 miles from Allen's front door. When investigators asked where he was that night, Allen said he was scuba diving at Fort Point near Big Sur, alone on the night before Christmas, with no one who could confirm it. That alibi comes entirely from one source, Robert Graysmith's books, the investigative journalist who wrote the definitive account of the case. The problem? No independent police report has ever surfaced confirming that interview even took place. An unverifiable alibi for a solo activity with no witnesses, for a murder 6 miles away. That's the foundation. Murder number 2, Blue Rock Springs, July 4th, 1969. Darlene Ferrin killed. Mike Mageau survived. This one gets strange fast. Arthur Leigh Allen's house on Fresno Street was a 9-minute walk from the phone booth the Zodiac used to call Vallejo police after the shooting. 9 minutes, on foot. And Darlene Ferrin, the victim, had worked at the IHOP on Tennessee Street, less than 50 yards from Allen's house, just 2 years earlier. Her sister Linda later described a man named Lee who had harassed Darlene at work. Allen went by his middle name, Lee, sometimes just Lee. For this murder, there is no alibi in any police record. None. Investigators never obtained one. 22 years later, the surviving victim Mike Mageau picked Allen out of a photo lineup. 8 out of 10 certainty. That's him, he said. That's the man who shot me. Here's the problem. In 1969, right after the shooting, Mageau described his attacker as 5'8", around 195 pounds, with short curly blonde hair. Allen was 6'1", 241 pounds, and bald. That's not a close description. That's a different person. The detective who originally interviewed Mageau days after the shooting later said he didn't believe Mageau could have reliably identified the gunman in 1969, let alone 22 years later. So, no alibi, a possible victim connection, a geographic tie, and an eyewitness ID that contradicts the original description. Murder number 3. Lake Berryessa, September 27, 1969. Cecilia Shepard killed. Brian Hartnell survived. This is the one that keeps investigators up at night. Allen was interviewed 5 days after this murder, on October 6, 1969. His alibi? He'd been scuba diving at Salt Point Ranch on the Sonoma coast, stayed overnight, and returned to Vallejo sometime between 2 and 4:30 in the afternoon. The attack happened at 6:30 p.m. Salt Point to Lake Berryessa is about 2 hours. The timeline is tight, but not impossible. More importantly, he had no witnesses who could confirm any of it. He mentioned an unnamed couple from Treasure Island Naval Base who he'd met at the coast. Police tried to find them. They never did. And then there was the neighbor. Allen said a Mr. White could confirm his return time. Detectives went to find Mr. White. He was dead. He had died, Allen told them, approximately 1 week after police had questioned him. But here's the moment that made detectives' blood run cold. During that same interview, without being asked anything about a weapon, Allen volunteered the following. The 2 knives I had in my car with blood on them, the blood came from a chicken I had killed. No one had mentioned knives. No one had mentioned blood. The detective noted in his report that Allen appeared to believe police had information about a knife that they did not, in fact, possess. The Lake Berryessa attack was a stabbing. It was the only Zodiac attack that used a knife. And one more thing. In that first interview, Allen told police he had originally planned to go to Lake Berryessa that day, but decided to go to the coast instead. He volunteered the name of the murder site, unprompted, in the first interview, before he was a suspect. Size 10.5 Wing Walker boot prints were found at the scene. Allen wore size 10.5 shoes. The surviving victim, Brian Hartnell, was later asked to observe Allen at a hardware store. His response, "I can't say that isn't him." Murder number 4. Paul Stein, October 11, 1969. San Francisco cab driver, shot in the head at point-blank range. For this murder, there is no alibi on record at all. The first interview with Allen happened 5 days before this killing. No investigator appears to have gone back and asked where he was on October 11th. What exists instead is a claim from a career criminal named Ralph Spinelli. In 1990, facing 30 years for armed robbery, Spinelli told police that Allen had told him he was going to San Francisco to kill a cab driver, and came back and said he'd done it. Spinelli was looking for a deal, that's obvious, but investigators noted something uncomfortable. Spinelli knew Allen's name before it had ever been publicly connected to the case. One of the officers who possibly saw the Zodiac fleeing the Stein scene later said Allen was about 100 pounds heavier than the man he observed. Allen's fingerprints did not match the bloody prints in the cab. 2 exclusions, but still no alibi. Step back and look at the pattern. Across 4 murders, Allen's alibis follow the same template. Solo activities, unverifiable claims, unnamed witnesses who either can't be found or turned up dead. And in the middle of it all, a spontaneous confession about bloody knives that no one had asked about, at the scene of the only stabbing in the entire case. That's not evidence of guilt, but it's not nothing either. Act 2. The Watch. On August 4, 1971, 2 SFPD homicide inspectors, Dave Toshey and Bill Armstrong, drove to the town of Pinole to interview Allen at his workplace. Toshey was one of the best homicide detectives in the country. He later became the basis for Steve McQueen's character in Bullet. He had been working the Zodiac case for 2 years, and the first thing he noticed when he saw Allen was what was on his wrist. A Zodiac Seawolf, a Swiss diving watch. On the face, the brand name, and the logo, a circle with a crosshair running through it. The exact symbol the Zodiac Killer used to sign every letter he sent to police and newspapers. The exact symbol he painted on his executioner's costume at Lake Berryessa. Toshey later described the moment. It was a rugged man's watch. The kind of watch a man would buy to be seen, and I spotted it instantly. The word Zodiac. I asked him to show it to me. Here's what makes the watch significant. The Zodiac watch brand appears to be the only known commercial source where both the name Zodiac and the crosshair symbol appeared together in the 1960s. The crosshair alone had been used as an astrological symbol for centuries. But paired with the name on a product you could buy, that was the Zodiac watch. If someone wanted a symbol and a name for a killing persona, and they owned one of these watches, the connection would be obvious. Now here's the question that changes everything. When did Allen get that watch? There are 3 different answers, depending on who you ask. Rob Allen, Arthur's brother, says their mother gave Arthur the Zodiac Seawolf as a Christmas gift in December 1967, a full year before the first murder. Allen himself estimated he got the watch in 1969, after the murders had begun, but before the Zodiac name was widely known to the public. Don Chaney, the friend who first named Allen as a suspect, claims that during their conversation in late December 1968 or January 1969, Allen showed him the watch as a new acquisition, linking it directly to his stated plan to call himself Zodiac. Here's the credibility problem with Chaney's version. He did not mention the watch in his original 1971 police report. Not once. The watch only appeared in his account when he was retelling the story in the early 1990s, 20 years later. Researcher Michael Butterfield, who has spent years cross-referencing primary police documents on this case, puts it plainly. Chaney's timelines kept shifting. Details that would have been explosive in a 1971 police interview appeared only decades later when the case had become famous and Allen had become the central suspect. Does that mean Chaney is lying? Not necessarily. Memory is reconstructive, not playback. People add detail over time, especially when a story has been told and retold, shaped by documentaries and books and newspaper articles. But it does mean the watch as smoking gun narrative depends almost entirely on a memory that was added 20 years after the original report. Skeptics have another argument. The Zodiac brand wasn't that obscure. It was a real commercial product sold in the United States. Any number of people could have owned one. The crosshair symbol had existed for centuries before the watch company used it. The connection may be striking, but is it actually meaningful, or does it just feel meaningful because we know who owned it? Here's where we land. If Ron Allen is right, if Arthur got the watch in December 1967, a full year before the murders, then the watch is a source, not a coincidence. It would mean Allen owned an object that combined the name and symbol, and the Zodiac Killer used that exact combination. That's harder to dismiss. If Chaney's later account is accurate, the watch becomes something even more sinister. A prop Allen deliberately showed off as part of announcing his plan. And if Allen's own estimate is right, 1969 after the murders, then the direction of inspiration might actually run the other way. Maybe Allen bought a watch because the Zodiac was already famous. Maybe he was obsessed with the case, not the perpetrator of it. We don't know, and that ambiguity is the whole story. Act 3. The DNA problem. Now let's talk about why Arthur Leigh Allen was officially cleared, and why that clearance is shakier than almost anyone reports. In 2002, ABC's Primetime Thursday aired a segment that felt, at the time, like a breakthrough. The SFPD crime lab had tested 6 Zodiac letters. 3 yielded nothing, but 3 others, obtained from a retired police source, produced results. From the envelope of the November 1969 letter, a partial DNA fingerprint, 4 out of 9 possible genetic markers. Male. The lab supervisor, Dr. Sidney Holt, said it was enough to potentially narrow suspicions or eliminate suspects, but not enough to positively identify anyone. They compared it to DNA from Allen's preserved brain tissue, kept after his 1992 autopsy. The result? No match. Allen was excluded. SFPD Inspector Kelley Carroll went on record. Arthur Leigh Allen does not match the partial DNA fingerprint developed from bona fide Zodiac letters. And that became the official narrative. Allen, cleared by science. 16 years later, in 2018, researcher Tom Voigt, who runs the longest-running Zodiac research website, revealed something that had never been publicly disclosed. The DNA sample wasn't collected from beneath the stamp. It wasn't from the envelope seal. It wasn't from anywhere the Zodiac Killer would have necessarily placed his saliva. It was collected from the outside of the stamp. Voight's source was a retired SFPD inspector, and when he contacted Dr. Holt, by then Chief Scientific Officer at a forensic startup, she confirmed it. SF Weekly ran the story. The headline, "The Zodiac Killer DNA Profile That Never Was." Think about what this means. A stamp passes through a post office, a mail carrier's bag, an evidence locker, a crime lab, a storage facility. Over 30 years, dozens of people could have left traces on its exterior. The DNA profile that cleared Arthur Leigh Allen, the profile that has been cited in every documentary, every Wikipedia article, every true crime podcast, may have come from a postal worker in 1969. And here's the deeper problem. No usable DNA profile of the Zodiac Killer has ever been obtained. The California DOJ tested 3 Zodiac letters in 2007. They could not replicate Holt's results. No usable DNA. Napa County tested physical evidence from Lake Berryessa in 2010. A bottle, a blanket, rope from the scene. They got a mixed profile from multiple contributors. Couldn't separate them. Vallejo PD sent envelopes to a private lab in 2018, inspired by the Golden State Killer arrest. No confirmed results have ever been publicly announced. The Golden State Killer was caught because investigators had a complete DNA profile and could run it through genealogy databases to find distant relatives, then work forward through family trees to identify a suspect. For that method to work on the Zodiac case, you need a full profile. You need DNA that definitely came from the killer. Right now, investigators have neither. Now, what about Allen's relatives? Allen's brother Ron Allen was alive for years after Arthur's death. To our knowledge, based on all available public reporting, he was never approached for a genealogical DNA comparison by law enforcement. If a full Zodiac DNA profile could be obtained from a sample definitively linked to the killer, comparing it to Ron Allen's DNA would tell you whether the two men share a family line. Not a confirmation, but a signal, a direction. That has never been done. The DNA story isn't the only exclusion, of course. Allen's fingerprints didn't match evidence from Paul Stein's cab. His palm prints didn't match a 1974 Zodiac letter. Multiple handwriting experts said his writing didn't match the Zodiac letters. Though at least one DOJ examiner specifically said, "Do not eliminate this suspect because of handwriting." He passed a polygraph. He was 6'1". The Zodiac was described as shorter. His physical description didn't fit. By every measurable forensic standard, Arthur Leigh Allen was excluded from this case. And yet every investigator who worked the case closely, Toshi, Armstrong, the Vallejo detectives, came away saying the same thing. The circumstantial evidence was so dense, so specific, so concentrated around this one man, that they couldn't let it go. Vallejo PD Captain Roy Conway, who led the 1991 search of Allen's home, said it directly. "I believe, as I always have, that the Zodiac was Arthur Leigh Allen. If Allen were alive today, we would file charges against him." Those aren't the words of a man who found the bomb-making materials, the illegal weapons, the Zodiac watch, the unexplained bloody knives, and the royal typewriter, and walked away satisfied. The open question. Here's where we actually are. The exclusions against Allen are real, but the DNA exclusion, the one most people treat as definitive, rests on a sample that may never have touched the Zodiac's hands. The handwriting experts disagreed with each other. The fingerprints from the cab could have belonged to a passenger from any point in Stein's shift. The circumstantial case, the unprompted bloody knife comment, the spontaneous mention of Lake Berryessa as a planned destination, the watch, the proximity to the Blue Rock Springs phone booth, the connection to Darlene Ferrin, the alibi that produces dead witnesses and unlocatable couples. That case has never been seriously answered. And the thing that could actually answer it, a clean DNA sample from a known Zodiac source run through modern genealogical databases, has never been obtained. What would it actually take? First, better forensic work on the letters, not the outside of the stamp, the envelope seal, the back of the stamp. analyzed with the same degraded DNA techniques used on archaeological remains. Technology that didn't exist in 2002. Second, if a full profile is ever obtained, compare it to surviving relatives of every named suspect. Ron Allen may or may not still be alive. Genealogical databases could do the rest. Third, someone needs to stop treating the 2002 ABC DNA exclusion as settled science. It isn't. Arthur Leigh Allen died in August 1992. 2 weeks after Vallejo PD announced they were seeking new evidence against him, and about 6 months before what investigators believed might finally be enough to bring charges. He never confessed. He maintained his innocence to the end. In one of his last television interviews, he said, "I am not the Zodiac. I've never killed anyone. These guys almost, well, had me questioning myself." The case is still open. It has been open for 57 years. And the best forensic question, the one that could move it forward, has never actually been answered. If you made it this far, subscribe, leave a comment with your take, and check the description for the primary sources used in this video. All of it is publicly available. All of it you can read yourself. The Zodiac case doesn't need more speculation. It needs more scrutiny. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.